On my 36th birthday, under the golden lights of the Bellagio's most exclusive dining room, my own nephew stood up, smiled, and poured an entire glass of red wine over my $5,000 gown. The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The rich red liquid slid down the cream silk like a slow-motion disaster, each drop staining years of loyalty I'd poured into this family. Across the table, my sister Melissa laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut deeper than the wine ever could. My mother, Carol, didn't gasp, didn't scold, didn't even look shocked. She patted Ethan's hand, like he'd just told a charming joke at Thanksgiving. That was the moment I realized, family can cut deeper than any stranger ever could. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, feeling every eye in the room on me, the way you feel the weight of a storm before it breaks. Because the truth was, this wasn't about one ruined dress. This wasn't even about one humiliating night in front of my friends. No. This was the breaking point after years, of being the family's safety net, punching bag, and invisible backbone. You see, while Melissa bounced between boyfriends and dead-end jobs in Reno, and my mother spent decades excusing every bad decision she made, I built a life from nothing in San Francisco. A career in tech marketing that demanded 70-hour weeks, sacrificed holidays, and every ounce of my ambition. I thought success would earn me their respect. Instead, it only seemed to sharpen their resentment. I'd paid their rent, covered their emergencies, bought Ethan a $40,000 car when he turned 16. And what did I get in return? A seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. And that night, watching wine soak into silk, hearing laughter instead of an apology, I realized I wasn't going to let this be my life anymore. Because some moments don't just stain fabric. They stain something much deeper. If you're wondering how we got to the point where an 18-year-old thought it was perfectly acceptable to humiliate me in public, well, let's rewind. I've always been the responsible one. While my older sister Melissa was skipping college classes and moving in with whichever boyfriend promised to change her life, I was the one grinding it out, taking unpaid internships, working retail on weekends, and climbing the ladder one exhausting rung at a time. By 29, I was a national marketing director for a tech company in San Francisco. My apartment overlooked the bay. I drove a car I'd actually paid off. I wore clothes that came with dry clean only tags, not clearance stickers. Melissa had other priorities. She called them emergencies, but somehow those emergencies always ended up at Nordstrom's or in a hotel suite in Lake Tahoe. When her rent was late, she called me. When her car broke down, she called me. When Ethan needed the latest iPhone for school, you guessed it, she called me. And I answered. Every time. Because family helps family, right? At least, that's what my mother always said, though strangely, the flow of help only ever went in one direction. Carol, my mom, had perfected the art of minimizing anything I accomplished. When I got my first big promotion, she said, just make sure you don't overwork yourself, honey. When I bought my apartment, it was, well, property taxes will eat you alive. But Melissa? Every minor milestone was met with applause. Survived a month without being fired? She's trying her best. Managed to pay rent without my help? We should celebrate. And the truth is, I let it happen. I told myself it was fine. That someday, they'd see me clearly. That if I just kept giving, kept showing up, they'd realize I wasn't just the rich sister, I was family. That fantasy lasted exactly until my 36th birthday. Because when I booked the private dining room at the Bellagio, months in advance, when I ordered the floral arrangements, the champagne, and the custom cake with my name in gold lettering, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the night they'd finally be proud. I didn't know then that I was planning the stage for my own public humiliation. The morning of my birthday, I woke up in my suite at the Bellagio to sunlight spilling over the strip. Everything about that day was designed to feel perfect. A full spa treatment, massage, facial, hair styling, followed by makeup from one of the top artists in Vegas. When I slipped into my gown, a custom silk blend with hand-stitched beadwork, I felt unstoppable. This was the version of me I'd worked years to become, confident, successful, and ready to celebrate on my own terms. By 6:30, my closest friends were arriving in the private dining room. They came with hugs, laughter, and beautifully wrapped gifts. The room glowed under crystal chandeliers, and the champagne sparkled in its flutes. But my family? 7 o'clock passed. No sign. 7:15. Still nothing. Melissa had texted once, "Traffic's insane. Might be a little late." That was all. At 7:45, 45 minutes into the first course, the doors finally opened. My mother walked in wearing the same dress she'd worn to every semi-formal event for the last 10 years. Melissa followed, looking irritated, her phone in hand. And Ethan? Ethan sauntered in wearing a faded hoodie, ripped jeans, and sneakers so filthy they looked like they'd been through a construction site. He didn't even glance around the room, just muttered, "Yo," and slid into his seat like he'd been dragged here against his will. I told myself to breathe. This was fine. We could still salvage the night. But the cracks were already forming. When my friend Jessica tried to engage Ethan in conversation, asking about his plans after graduation, he shrugged and said, "Not everyone gets to go to college, you know. Some of us actually have to work." Melissa smirked, sipping her wine, and added, "Yeah, Rachel. Not all of us can sit in fancy offices all day." My friend shifted uncomfortably. I laughed it off, even though my stomach tightened. And then came the moment that, looking back, should have told me exactly where the night was headed. While the waiter described the main course, a Wagyu fillet with black truffle juice, Ethan leaned toward Melissa and whispered something. She chuckled, glanced at me, and shook her head like she'd just been told the funniest joke in the world. I didn't know it then, but that private little laugh was the first ripple in the wave that was about to drown the entire evening. By the time the main course arrived, the air in the room felt heavier. My friends were doing their best to keep the conversation flowing, asking Melissa about Reno, asking Ethan about sports, even complimenting my mother's dress. But my family wasn't interested in small talk. Ethan was glued to his phone, the blue glow lighting up his face as he scrolled. Melissa answered questions with one-word replies, then steered every conversation back to how expensive everything in Vegas was. At one point, my friend Mark mentioned how beautiful the view was from my San Francisco apartment. Melissa didn't miss a beat. Must be nice to live like that while the rest of us scrape by. I felt the sting, but I kept my smile in place. Not here. Not tonight. When dessert was mentioned, I tried to include Ethan. "Hey, they've got a non-alcoholic sparkling cider for you. I think you'll like it." He didn't even look up. "Yeah, whatever." The waiter rolled in the dessert cart, an over-the-top display of chocolate sculptures and edible gold leaf, a centerpiece cake with "Happy Birthday, Rachel" written in shimmering calligraphy. Gasps and applause came from my friends. But at the other end of the table, Ethan's expression shifted. His smirk turned into something colder, calculating. I caught Melissa leaning toward him. She whispered something, too quiet to catch, but it made him laugh under his breath. My mother noticed, leaned in, and joined their little huddle. I knew that look. I'd seen it at family gatherings growing up. It was the look they gave each other right before making me the punchline. Still, I told myself, don't take the bait. But then Melissa sat back, her wine glass swirling in her hand, and said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "You know, Rachel, it's funny. You spend all this money on clothes, cars, and dinners like this, but some people would call that wasting money when there are folks who can't even pay rent." Every head at the table turned toward me. My friend shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. I could feel it, the night teetering on the edge of something irreversible. And in the pit of my stomach, I knew. Melissa wasn't finished. I could feel it, the air in the room tightening, pressing down on my chest. My fork rested midair, the steak cooling on my plate, but I couldn't taste a thing. Ethan had stopped pretending to be interested in his food. His eyes were locked on me, a slow, deliberate smirk spreading across his face like a shadow creeping over sunlight. "You know, Aunt Rachel," he said, voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the dining room, "for someone who acts like she's better than everyone else, you sure spend a lot just to prove it." Melissa's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, then lowered as she grinned, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. My mother gave a soft tsk, but it wasn't disapproval, it was encouragement. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Ethan, this is my birthday. Let's keep the conversation respectful." He leaned back, draping one arm over his chair, like he was on stage and the spotlight was his. "Respectful? Sure. I'll respect you, once you stop shoving your money in everyone's face." Melissa laughed, a sharp burst that drew glances from nearby tables. And then I saw it, the slow, casual way his fingers curled around the stem of his wine glass. The dark red liquid shimmered under the chandelier light, catching glints of gold from the room. He lifted it just high enough for the light to hit the surface, swirling it once, twice, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Melissa didn't stop him. She didn't even blink. In that split second, I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. He rose slightly from his chair, leaned over the table, and in one swift, deliberate motion, tipped the entire glass forward. The wine hit me like a cold, silken wave, the scent of tannins and oak flooding my senses. I watched it bloom across the cream silk of my gown, deep crimson tendrils racing down toward the hem, dripping off in fat, heavy drops onto the white tablecloth. Gasps erupted. A waiter froze mid-step. Somewhere, silverware clattered to the floor. Ethan set the empty glass down with the finality of a gavel. "Now you look like you actually belong back in Reno." Melissa's laugh was louder this time, rich with satisfaction. My mother reached over, patting his arm like he'd just made a clever toast. "All right, sweetheart, that's enough. No apology. No shame." I sat perfectly still, my hands flat on the table, feeling the cold seep through the fabric into my skin. I could taste the metallic tang of rage at the back of my throat. Because this wasn't just an insult. It was an execution. And in that moment, I knew. I was done playing their game. The room was still humming with the aftershock of what had just happened. Conversations hadn't resumed, they'd just stopped. I could feel dozens of eyes burning into me, strangers, waiters, even the pianist in the corner had paused mid-song. My friends sat frozen, their faces a mix of outrage and disbelief. Melissa was already scrolling through her phone, no doubt replaying the scene in her head like a private victory. Ethan leaned back, arms folded, the picture of smug satisfaction. My mother poured herself more wine. Not one of them said the words "I'm sorry." I placed my napkin gently on the table, the way you do when you've decided you're finished. My hands were steady, but my pulse was a war drum in my ears. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm, too calm. The kind of calm that makes people shift uncomfortably because they can feel what's underneath it. Melissa smirked. "Don't be so dramatic, Ratch. It's just a dress." I looked her dead in the eye. "Yes. It is." I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled. No rushing, no flinching. I let the silence stretch, thick and heavy, until you could almost hear it settle over the table like dust. My friends rose with me, without needing to be asked. Jessica slipped her arm around my shoulders. Mark stepped forward, angling himself between me and Ethan like a human shield. We walked out together, the weight of 100 unspoken things trailing behind us. The maitre d' held the door, his eyes darting to the stain on my gown before looking away quickly. The moment we stepped into the hallway, the sound of the dining room shut off like a slammed door. Only the soft echo of my heels on the marble floor remained. In the elevator, Jessica whispered, "Do you want me to call security? To file a report?" I shook my head. "No. I'm not wasting another second of my birthday on them." But inside, the decision was already crystallizing, sharp, cold, and unshakable. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The suite door clicked shut behind me, muting the chaos of the casino floor. For a moment, I just stood there in the entryway, letting the quiet wrap around me. The gown clung to my skin, heavy with wine, the scent of dark fruit and oak rising like an unwanted perfume. Under the chandelier light, the crimson stain had deepened, spreading across the silk in jagged shapes that looked almost violent. I crossed the room slowly, my heels tapping against the marble, and stepped in front of the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look humiliated. She looked dangerous. I peeled off the gown carefully, the fabric cold and limp in my hands, and draped it over the back of a chair. The stain was beyond saving, but I wasn't thinking about dry cleaners. I was thinking about evidence. Because in my world, marketing, strategy, optics, you don't erase moments like this. You use them. I picked up my phone. Notifications stacked the screen like falling dominoes, texts from my friends, missed calls from Jessica, and, buried between them, a social media tag. I opened it. A photo. Me, mid-shock, the wine just beginning to bloom across my dress. Taken from an angle only someone at my table could have had. Captioned. When rich auntie needs to be taken down a peg. Ethan had posted it. Melissa had liked it. My mother had commented with a laughing emoji. The fury that had been simmering since dinner crystallized into something sharp, precise. I walked to the desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. My fingers flew over the keys, not in rage, but in focus. Credit card statements. Bank transfers. Purchase histories. Every emergency payment I'd made in the last 5 years. The car I'd bought Ethan. The trips I'd funded. The bills I'd covered. Line after line, dollar after dollar, forming a paper trail that didn't just tell a story, it built a case. My case. By the time I finished, the neat stack of printed statements sat in the center of the desk, aligned perfectly, as clean and deliberate as the decision I'd just made. They thought tonight was about embarrassing me. They had no idea I was about to flip the script. The next morning, Las Vegas was still asleep when I ordered coffee to my suite. The strip below was quiet, just street sweepers and the occasional early gambler drifting between neon signs still buzzing from the night before. I wasn't tired. I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. At exactly 8 a.m., I made my first call. Hello, this is Rachel Turner. I need to remove an authorized user from my credit card, effective immediately. The customer service rep confirmed Ethan's mother's name. Melissa Turner. Yes, I said, close her access permanently. And issue me a new card with a different number. Overnight delivery. As she typed, I walked to the balcony, phone pressed to my ear, the desert sun catching on the skyline. No, I told the rep, I don't need to notify her. I think she'll figure it out. When I hung up, I didn't even sit down before dialing again, this time to my lawyer. Thomas answered on the second ring, his voice still gravelly with sleep. Rachel? Is everything okay? It's better than okay, I said. I need to reclaim a car I legally own. Today. I laid it out, the purchase receipt in my name, the insurance I paid for, the monthly stipend that covered Ethan's gas and maintenance. Thomas didn't hesitate. You're on solid ground. If it's registered to you, you can take it back any time. 30 minutes later, I had a towing company on the line, scheduling a discreet pickup from the high school parking lot where Ethan would be leaving the car during football practice. By the time I hung up, I'd already mapped the next move, canceled the automatic transfers Melissa treated like her personal paycheck. No more rent money. No more emergency Venmos. No more lifelines. Every cut was clean. Precise. Surgical. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was pulling wires out of a machine that had been draining me for over a decade. And with every wire I cut, I could feel the weight lifting. By noon, the financial umbilical cord was gone. By sunset, they'd realize it. And when they did, I'd be ready, documents in hand, facts laid bare, and not a single ounce of guilt left to give. It didn't take long. At 12:17 p.m., my phone lit up with Melissa's name. I let it ring. A minute later, a text. Melissa, my card's not working. Gas station says it's declined. Call the bank now. 30 seconds later. Melissa, hello? Are you seriously ignoring me? By 12:25, she'd moved on to voicemail. Her voice was high, tight, teetering between panic and rage. Rachel, I'm stranded at a chevron with a line of cars behind me. This is ridiculous. Fix the card. I didn't reply. At 12:42, the next notification hit, a missed call from Mom. I knew before answering that Carol's tone would be somewhere between wounded and accusatory. I was right. Rachel, what's this I hear about you cutting off your sister's credit card? She needs that for emergencies. This is petty. Whatever happened last night, it's no reason to punish her financially. I kept my voice even. It's not punishment. It's called ending an unhealthy arrangement. Before she could respond, another call buzzed in. Ethan. I switched lines. He didn't bother with hello. Where's my car? I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight move slowly across my suite's white carpet. My car is on its way back to San Francisco. You can't do that. That's theft. It's registered to me, insured by me, and paid for by me. That makes it mine. You've been borrowing it. Now I'm done lending. There was a sharp exhale, the sound of him pacing. Is this about the wine? God, it was just a joke. Humiliating someone in public isn't a joke. And neither is posting it online. Silence. Then, the click of the call ending without goodbye. By 1:10, the texts were piling up. Screenshots of angry group messages between Melissa and Mom. Pings from Ethan's friends on social media calling me heartless. Each one felt less like an attack and more like confirmation. The machine I'd been feeding for years was breaking down, piece by piece. And at 2:55, when the front desk called to say, Ms. Turner, 3 guests are here to see you, Melissa, Ethan, and Carol. I knew the real fight was about to walk through my door. 3 sharp knocks. Not polite. Not tentative. The kind of knocks that announce, we're not here to talk. We're here to win. I opened the door to find exactly what I expected. Melissa, red-faced, jaw tight, eyes blazing. Ethan, hood pulled low, hands shoved into his pockets, bouncing on his heels like he was ready for a fight. My mother, Carol, wearing the expression she'd perfected over decades, part martyr, part disappointed saint. Come in, I said, stepping aside. My voice was calm, but the air inside my suite shifted the moment they crossed the threshold, like a storm moving into a still room. Melissa didn't sit. You stranded my son at school. You humiliated me at a gas station. And you canceled my credit card without even telling me. Who does that to their own family? I moved to the dining table, where I'd laid everything out, neat stacks of paper, each page clipped and labeled. Sit down, I said evenly. All of you. Carol sighed heavily as if humoring me. Ethan slumped into a chair, sprawling like he owned the place. Melissa stayed standing, until I pulled the first stack forward and slid it across the table. 5 years of bank transfers. Every single emergency payment I've made to you, Melissa. That's $58,400. She glanced at the pages but didn't touch them. That's not the point. I cut her off. It's exactly the point. I pushed the second stack forward. Credit card statements. Over $12,000 in charges. Designer handbags. Hotel suites. Concert tickets. Not a single one of those qualifies as an emergency. Melissa's cheeks flushed. That's my business. No, I said sharply. It was my money. Which makes it my business. Ethan snorted. You act like you're broke now. You've got plenty. I turned my gaze on him, unblinking. And you've had plenty too, Ethan. Like the $40,000 car I bought you. Plus insurance. Plus maintenance. That's over $50,000 for you alone. He shifted in his chair, but his tone stayed defiant. You gave it to me. I lent it to you. And yesterday, you made sure I'd never lend you anything again. Carol finally spoke, her voice low but laced with guilt-tripping sweetness. Rachel, you're making too much out of one silly mistake. Family forgives. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the table. This isn't about one night. This is about a lifetime of disrespect, of using me, of treating me like a walking ATM. That ended the second Ethan poured wine on me and you. I looked at my mother, patted his hand instead of telling him he was out of line. The room went still. Even Melissa didn't have a comeback. I straightened. The credit card is closed. The car is mine again. The monthly transfers stop now. And unless this family learns what respect looks like, so does every other form of support. Melissa's mouth opened, but I held up a hand. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. For the first time, they all looked unsure. Not apologetic. Not yet. But the confidence, the entitlement, had cracks. And I intended to split those cracks wide open. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, filling the silence like a held breath. Melissa was the first to crack. She pushed back from the table, pacing the length of the suite's carpet like a caged animal. So that's it? You're just cutting us off? After everything I've done for you? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Everything you've done for me? Melissa, name one time you've supported me when I needed it. She opened her mouth, and then closed it again. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression hardening into something between defiance and fear. So I'm just supposed to figure it out on my own now? No car, no help, nothing? I met his stare without blinking. Exactly. Like millions of other 18-year-olds manage to do every day. He scoffed, but there was a flicker, just a flicker, of uncertainty in his eyes. Carol tried next, her voice trembling in a way I recognized all too well, the wounded mother act. Rachel, you're punishing us. Family doesn't punish each other. I stepped closer, my tone quiet but edged with steel. This isn't punishment. This is cause and effect. You treat someone with disrespect long enough, you lose access to what they give you. That's not cruelty, it's boundaries. Melissa stopped pacing. Her face had shifted from fury to calculation. What if we apologize? Would that make you feel better? Get things back to how they were? I shook my head. An apology doesn't erase patterns that have been cemented for decades. You can't say sorry on Monday and expect me to forget the last 20 years by Tuesday. Ethan muttered under his breath, but I caught it. Guess money really does change people. That was when I leaned in, close enough for him to see the cold clarity in my eyes. No, Ethan. It doesn't change people, it reveals them. He looked away. I gathered the stacks of documents into one neat pile and set them back in the center of the table. Take these with you. Look at them. See exactly what you've been handed and what you've thrown away. Decide if you can live without it, or if you're willing to treat me like a human being instead of a bank account. Melissa's hand hovered over the papers, then withdrew like they might burn her. I walked to the door and opened it. You can go now. No one moved at first. Then Carol stood, her voice low. I never meant to hurt you. I nodded. But you did. Repeatedly. And now we all have to live with the consequences. They filed out, the air in the room seeming lighter with each step they took toward the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them, and I stood there for a moment, just breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next emergency call, the next guilt trip, the next withdrawal from the account of my patience. The machine was off. And I was finally free. 6 months later, the sting of that night at the Bellagio had faded into something else, something sharper, but cleaner. The silence from my family had been deafening at first. Days with no calls, no texts. Weeks without a single emergency. The absence was almost unsettling, like a constant background noise suddenly gone. And then, little by little, the gaps filled, not with demands, but with small signs of change. Ethan was the first crack in the wall. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a short, almost awkward text. Got a job at the auto shop. Saving for my own car. Not asking for anything, just thought you should know. It wasn't an apology. But it was the first time he'd told me something about his life without a price tag attached. Melissa's shift came slower. According to mutual friends, she'd taken a front desk job at a mid-range hotel. Smaller apartment. Budgeting, begrudgingly, but doing it. 3 months in, she sent me an email. No subject line, no flourish. I still don't like how it happened. But I think I needed it. So thanks. Even my mother, Carol, began to soften. Our phone calls were shorter, but there was a new note in her voice, less judgment, more curiosity. She asked about my work, my friends. Once, she even said, "You sound lighter. Happier." And I was. Because without the constant drain, financial and emotional, I had room for other things. I took a photography class. I booked a trip to Italy. I said yes to invitations without worrying about being available for a family crisis that was never mine to solve. When my 37th birthday came, I didn't want a grand restaurant or designer dress. I invited a handful of friends and, yes, my family, into my own home. Simple meal. Homemade cake. Laughter that didn't feel forced. Ethan handed me a card, handwritten, clumsy, but genuine. Melissa brought flowers. My mother stood to make a toast, her voice steady. To my daughter, who loved us enough to show us where we'd gone wrong. I'm proud of you, Rachel. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. But it was real. And for the first time, I felt hope that we were building something healthier, brick by brick, respect by respect. Lesson learned. Sometimes, the hardest thing you can do for the people you love is say no. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're lines that protect what's worth keeping in. If you've ever been in a relationship, family or otherwise, where giving felt like drowning, remember this: you are allowed to step out of the water.